Alright, so here's a quick little unboxing of the Western Digital Blue M2 SATA 2280 250 gig hard drive, or excuse me, solid state drive. So it's a very thin case, there's not much to it, or excuse me, box, that is. So there's our solid state, there's nothing else in the box there. So there you go, there she is, nice and small, not really much to the box. Nice small little drive. I really can't see much about it right now. This is my first M2 drive. I don't know how much more of speed I'm going to get off of running off of a PCIe lane on the computer versus running off of a SATA lane, but we'll do a couple tests here and have the results. So taking a look inside the computer, towards the bottom of the motherboard is where your M2 2280 slot is. Right above that is the graphics card, which is currently blocking the installation procedure of it. Right there is where you'll be putting the SSD, and we'll be removing that graphics card so that we can slide it into that slot right there. And here's the final product. The card is installed with the supplied screw that was on the motherboard, and the GPU is going back here. So here it is. I've had the SSD installed. I'm booting up to my BIOS, so I can select the M.2 SSD as my primary drive off from one of the two 2.5-inch SSDs. On the top of the menu here, the GUI user interface allows you to drag and drop and move stuff around. However, I just go into settings into the old-fashioned way of selecting my boot option 1 through, this one has 13 because it can go on and off the network. It can go boot from LAN, it can boot from your CD, DVD, flash drives, whatever. So right now I'm just flipping through it, trying to figure out exactly which one I want to click and where I want to move it to. So my primary is going to be obviously SATA 6 is what the M.2 SSD is on. So I'm going to be using that one as my primary. I'm rechecking everything, looking at the top here, and just moving this around. And I just kind of sit here and play with this for a while and try to figure out what exactly I want to do to make it fit the correct spot here. Alright, so we got everything set up. We got USB as a primary, CD as a secondary, hard drive. I mean, you can set your boot priorities up here at the top, but we went into the boot here. So let's see if we can boot from that USB stick. Save changes. So boot override, I have no idea. So save changes and reboot. Let's see what that does. Hopefully it boots from that USB stick. There we go. So English, we're going to install now. 50 gig drive formatted. So we're going to select that one. And this should go pretty quick. So it's copying it off of the flash drive. Okay, here's something that I neglected to say initially. So I did all my pre-install stuff, meaning I had all my stuff here, had my tools, had the drive set out, had the USB stick set out, so I had it all ready. What I didn't do, which you should do if you do this, is back up your entire drive you're replacing. In this case, I'm adding a drive, I'm not removing the other 3 drives that are in place, so if something happens, I can always reboot back to my original 240 gig PNY SSD and be back online. Everything's right there. So putting the new M2 chip in there, I'm installing Windows to that, and we're going to use that as our primary. After we get into Windows, everything gets done installing, we update all the drivers on the motherboard, the video card, and the couple applications that I desperately need on that primary drive. Then I would take my secondary, the 240 gig, 2.5, 2.5 inch, excuse me, PNY SSD, and I will start copying some of the files off of it and just place it onto the M.2 SSD. When that's done, I will erase the 240 gig drive. I'll erase the 90 gig drive, and I will essentially not use the 90 gig anymore, and I will mount the let's move this light out of the way here. So I'm going to alleviate a lot of this rat's nest up here that I don't need. This is a 3.5 inch drive caddy, and then I have a dual 2.5 inch drive caddy, which this one runs off of one SATA, this one runs off of one SATA, versus running two SSDs off of excuse me, let me backtrack a little bit. It has two SATAs, one for each drive, but only one power for two drives, versus having two powers, two SATAs, and a power and a SATA. It's kind of confusing. I bought these drives. Let me flip around here while this guy's still installing. The reason I did this is because you've got a hard drive light here. However, that hard drive light is now reading from the M.2 in here, but if I was ever using my 3.5 or any one of these SSDs in this 2.5 inch bay, I would never know which drive's reading, which drive's copying, none of that. So I wanted another way of looking at it. Plus, you know, I can easily hot swap any of these drives if I wanted to. Essentially, this guy will stay in here, this guy will stay in here, but I'll just lose this second drive for right now. It's kind of protruding a little bit because of the rat's nest in here. What I also may do is just trying to clean up. This is a non-modular power supply. I may install the SSD here because you have mounting brackets for an SSD right there and an SSD right there. I may alleviate some of these cables here and this big guy up here, and I can put the 3.5 inch drive on the bottom and an SSD here and run the cables behind here and alleviate all this pinched cableness up there. It's all wow. So this took a little longer than I thought. Originally what happened was it kept reading I had to remove it, but it was plug and play. So took out my original 240 gig drive so it wouldn't keep reading that drive. Then I go back into the BIOS and set it up so that it used only the 250 gig Western Digital Blue M2 SSD as the main drive, and just turned off the Western Digital, 1 terabyte 3.5 inch drive I had in there. So now the only thing that it was booting from was that. Then with having the USB stick as the main drive, or as the first bootable device, it kept booting back in and asking me to reboot again. So after removing all those drives, I was able to reformat the stick, and now I'm coming back up online. It just came up as starting files. It's rebooting now, and it should be going back into Windows because it was saying setting up, and it just did a reboot.